Hello everybody, welcome back to Creating Hanley. I am Kimberly at Creating Hanley, and in today's video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a square in a square. The second method. This is the first method. Actually, there's another video tutorial that I did on how to make this method, so I will pop that up here somewhere. You can go ahead and watch that to see how I did this one. Now I'm going to build on that and show you a different way. Now in this method, I used the same size fabric for both pieces. So if you close this up, you can see I used the same size fabric for the front and the back. And then you kind of pop it open like a present or a window or something. And then voila, the inside pattern is revealed, or the inside motif is revealed, and then you have the square on the outside. So if I do turn this way, you can see, right? Does that make sense? But you did 1-to-1 ratio. The fabric for both front and back is 1-to-1 ratio, the same size. Now in this second method, I'm going to show you another way on how to make this. Now the one downfall on this one is that you lose, see if I trim this, so say for giggles, I trimmed this, and you can see there is 0 seam allowance in here. So I'm going to lose these points on this diamond, on this square in here, because when I put this into a seam allowance, even at an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch, it's going to be a rounded corner. Or not rounded, but it's going to be cut off, right? So a flattened point. So you're going to lose these points. That's the nature of this method. Now, if you don't care, and I'll show you what I mean in this sample. See how this point is severely lost? It is gone. So what I did was I took this same 4.5 inch fabric, and then I trimmed this, and then I put another layer of square around it. So you can see that by trimming and then putting in the next layer, this layer, I really lost that point on all of them. So that can happen in this method, in this like pop open method, okay? Just so you know. Now for me, this actually is whipped cream, so whipped cream isn't pointy anyway. Whipped cream is kind of soft, but regardless of what the motif of the fabric is, you're going to lose those points. Now this one I kind of salvaged a little bit, but you still can lose these points, and even in the happy birthday one, you still lose the points a little bit. So if you really want crisp points, I would recommend a couple things. 1, maybe not do this method. Maybe do the method we're going to do today. 2, perhaps pre-wash your fabric so it shrinks and you get, or maybe I should say starch. If you starch your fabric, it'll become more stiff like paper, and you can make like precision cuts and precision sew lines. So I kind of get a little bit wonky anyway, but when you trim, you'll have like precision cuts. So that's a couple of things I would recommend. If you pre-wash, it also shrinks. So starch and pre-washing shrinks the fabric a little bit, so that if you use steam in your iron, hopefully it won't distort your fabric. So those are the couple of tips that I would give you. Definitely starching your fabric will make the fabric easier to work with, and you won't lose your points as readily as I did here, because I did not starch. Okay, does that make sense? Anyway, what I was saying was 1-to-1 ratio. So the front and the two parts of this fabric, the contrast fabric, I used a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 piece to 1 piece, same cut. It doesn't matter what the dimension is. I happen to use 4.5 inches on this one just so I could kind of get like the happy birthday. Now it's not, I mean, you can't actually, it's cut off. But anyway, you can use 2 inches, 2.5 inches. You could even go down to 1 inch if you wanted to make it really small and then build up from there. So like I did layers on here. I just built up layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. So you can do that too if you like, to do your square and a square and a square and a square. But this next method, I use 2 backgrounds to 1 dark. So here's my background to 1 dark. So I put a little sticker on. I used a 4.5 inch. So this uses extra fabric, and there is a little bit of waste to this. This was my no waste, easy square and a square method. This one is a little bit more complicated. You have to do some folding with this one. So let's get into it, okay? So I'm going to set this one aside. This can just kind of be our template. Now, when you cut your 4.5 inch, you cut 2 and I already cut these in diagonals. So you cut, here, let me just do this one. So you cut 2. So you cut 1 of your center, if you want to fussy cut it or whatever. You cut 1 center and then 2 same size, 4.5 inch for this one, and then 2 4.5 inch for your sides. Okay, so they're gonna, and I already cut mine in diagonal. So you take your 2 4.5 inch and cut them on the diagonal. So you could do it a couple different ways if you wanted to line up these edges. Now this is not going to be as precise, but line up those edges, and then you take your scissors and pull it tight, and then, oh, here it is. Pull it tight, and then just start cutting all the way up that way, right? So then you've cut that in a diagonal, in half in diagonal, and just do that one time. Now what I did, or another method, is to take a straight edge, mark from here, let me put this down. So I mark it on the back. You take your straight edge, mark from diagonal corner to diagonal corner. You take your marking utensil, whatever that might be, or here's a pencil, whatever that might be, and then you just mark from one corner to the other, and then, and then that gives you a line that you can cut on using your scissors. You just cut along that line. Now another method is you don't even have to worry about a line. You just take your fabric and line up diagonal to diagonal corner, and then you take your rotary cutter and cut. So that's 3 methods that you can cut your diagonal. Now of course the rotary cutter is going to be the most precise, straight across. The scissors might get a little bit wonky. Even if you're following that line, it might get a little bit wonky. Depends on how steady you hold your hands and how good your eyes are. And then this method is just like quick and dirty. Just so it's up to you how you want to do that. Okay, so you can have any of those options that work for you. And if you're traveling, maybe you don't have a cut surface. Maybe you can only do like this, and then you just have like a travel sewing machine, and then you sew it on there. It depends on where you are. If you're like in a van, if you're doing the van life, or you're on vacation in your RV, or maybe in a cabin, maybe you don't have a cutting surface. Hopefully you would bring like a little travel one, so you could do some cutting, but maybe it just turns out, I don't know, whatever situation happens. Maybe you're just like, I just want to do this. Great, do it. Kind of got off tangent. Anyway, now that you have your 4 triangles because you cut those 2 squares in half. You have your 4 triangles, fold them again. So you're going to take the long edge and match up the points and then make sure everything is flat. So what I will say first, iron all your fabric. Make sure you don't have wrinkles in the fabric, okay? Iron it all. Make sure it's wrinkle free. And then you can do this. Otherwise, you're not going to get exact measurements. And if you guys want perfect points, make sure your fabric is flat like paper, okay? So you measure those points and then finger press a crease in all of your triangles so that when you open it up, you have that, you can see that crease and it goes straight through the point here. And now I know where the middle, and you need this to match it up on this, you need to know where the middle of this triangle is, okay? So now I know the exact middle on all of my triangles. Now you take your fussy cut piece or your center piece and then again fold that in half. Again, make sure it's flat first. Fold it in half. Make sure these are flat, these are flat, these are all lined up perfectly. And then finger press, open it up, and then do the same thing to the opposite side. Make sure all those are lined up, finger press, and now you can see I have some creases in here. Now I know where the exact middle is of this square, the exact middle, and now I know where the halfway mark is, where the middle point is. Okay, you can see where the middle point is, where the middle is on these lines, on these edges. That is going to be important. Okay, now once we've got to that step, let's take, so if you're doing directional fabric on this side, you want to make sure that you've cut your squares so that your directional fabric is the way you want it to be. Okay? This happens to be whipped cream with sprinkles, so it doesn't matter to me. But what I want to do is take my top triangle, line up the folds, so now I know that's exactly lined up. Line up this edge, because see how this overhangs? So if I flip this over, do you see how we have overhang on here? So if you're just eyeballing it and you're really good at eyeballing it, that's fantastic. But if you want to be precise, especially with your points, you want to measure, line up that center, and then so that you have the exact overhang on both sides. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, now if you want to pop a pin in here, the other thing that you can do, so here's another tip, is find your middle on the top and then find your middle on the bottom. Draw a pin straight through, and now you know exactly where your center is, and those are lined up. Do you see how that works? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to leave my pin in here and leave that right there. So I flip this back over. So now I know. And down here at this corner, this is directly on that fold line as well. So you can measure up top and at the bottom. So you now know that this is going to be a perfectly square point. Okay, so I take my next piece and face sides together, do the exact same thing. So I'm going to take my pin, I'm going to center it right on here on the fold line, and I'm going to center it right on the fold line here. So when I draw these together, I know it is exactly where it needs to be. Okay, and now the fold line on here also goes straight down on this one, so I know it is exactly square. Okay, now I'm going to start with this one first. So I'm going to take it over to the machine, and so a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can leave the pin in if you like, but I'm not going to use a pin here. 1/4 inch seam allowance straight down. I'm taking it a little bit slow so I can be precise. And if you have more than one square that you're doing, then you can chain piece. But I'm not. I'm just going to take this one over this side and do this side. So you want to make sure that you do the opposite sides, that you're not going around the world kind of a square. You're doing opposite sides. Okay? So when you do the top, you do the bottom, and then you open that up. Now you can press this. And I'm just using just a hot iron, no steam. So you press that open. Opening it first is important. And then you do the same thing on the sides. You line up that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit for you. And it gets really shaky on the camera there. Sorry about that. So you open that up and you see how that works? Okay, now you have not lost the points, and you've also created a lot of seam allowance right here. Okay, so let me finish this other side. Line up the fold line. Line up that fold line. Okay. So you line up the fold line. Do you see how that's a perfect point now on this side? And then you have enough. So I'm going to iron this open. Okay. Now, let's measure this. Now remember, I used 4.5 inches on here, and I used 2 4.5 inches for my side pieces. So you can tell when I go in here, this is almost an inch. So I'm going to say this is, let's see, if that's a quarter, that's a quarter, that's a quarter, like 7/8. And on this side, yep, 7/8. Did I do the same over here? Yes. Okay, and then here. All right, so you can't even see that. So my 1/4 inch mark is going to be right here. Let's see if you can see this a little bit better. So my 1/4 inch seam allowance is right here at this mark, right here. So now I have, let's see, an extra quarter. So here's an extra 1/2 inch and just a little bit shy of an extra 1/2 inch. So there's, what, 3/4? 3 extra quarters of an inch for your seam allowance. So when you sew this in, you're definitely not going to lose any points on this one either. So if I bring this sample back, you can see I lost points. I lost my points on the edges of the middle. So you did not do that here. And I lost points on this side as well. So that is not going to happen even if I trim this up. So I have some extra fabric on the outside that I can trim. And I highly recommend trimming before you put the next layer on if you wanted to do that. So that gives you plenty of room. Now, that means that there's waste. Okay? So the other way was no waste. Simple. This is a little extra fabric, and plus there's a little bit of waste, but you will not lose your points on here. And if you add another layer to this, you're not going to lose your points. Okay? So could I have made, since this was a 4.5 inch block, could I have made these triangles a little bit smaller? Probably could have. Yeah, I probably could have made these maybe a 1/2 inch smaller, but that wouldn't give me a whole lot of room to trim. So maybe a 1/4 inch smaller. So maybe if this is 4.5 inch, you can maybe cut these squares to 4 1/4 inch, and that'll still give you enough room to trim and not lose your points. Okay? So I hope that helps you guys. That's the second method that you can use to make a square in a square. So have fun experimenting with these, and then try out all those different tips on how to fold and how to cut, and see what works best for you. Can you add another layer on here? Exactly, can. So what I would do is figure out what this size is. So if I want to trim this down to 6.5 inches, so if I put this 6.5 inch ruler up, you can see that this now will trim down to 6.5 inches perfectly. Okay? So I might do that, and then you would take your next layer, whatever contrasting or coordinating color you're going to use, and do 2 more 6.5 inch blocks. Now remember, that gives you a lot of extra space, and if you like that, fantastic. If you wanted to trim it down, instead of 6.5 inches, maybe make it 6 inch square or 6 1/4 inch square. So you can experiment, see what works best for you, and then, see whatever method you like. See what this turns out. Maybe there's a whole lot of too much space. Maybe instead of having that perfect point meet the other layer of fabric, maybe you wanted a little bit extra, and then this method will give you that. I hope you understand what I'm talking about there, right? So instead of this point meeting exactly that fabric, that next layer, maybe you wanted to have a little bit of extra fabric in there so that it's more easily, this scissor is not a very good pointer, but do you see what I mean? Like maybe you wanted to have an extra 1/8 of an inch fabric in here, or maybe a 1/4 inch. So this method will allow you to do that. Okay? So play with that, see what you think. Let me know in the comments what's working for you. And happy birthday. All right, guys. Bye for now. See you on the next tutorial.